Tonight we stay up late with Lonnie Zamora, a practical New Mexico police officer who heard a roar one spring evening and drove down into an arroyo to see who might need help, and found a white egg-shaped craft resting on the desert floor with two small figures in white standing beside it. He spent the rest of his life insisting, quietly, that he had told it exactly as it happened. This is the High Strangeness Sleep Society. The country around Socorro, New Mexico is high desert, an old mining and college town down along the Rio Grande, with low volcanic hills and pale mesas opening out to the south, cut here and there by arroyos, the dry gullies that carry water only when it comes rarely and hard. In the late afternoon, the light comes in low and gold off the greasewood, and the whole place holds a particular quiet, a land that has watched a great many things happen on it and kept its opinion to itself. On the evening of the 24th of April, 1964, a town police officer was driving through that country chasing a speeding car. His name was Lonnie Zamora, a Socorro policeman, a local man respected in the plain way a steady officer is, not given to tall tales, with no particular interest in flying saucers or the like. His trade was the ordinary, useful one of patrolling a small town on the long shifts, and he was good at it. On this evening, he was doing the most routine thing a patrolman does, running down a car that had gone past him too fast, when two things happened at once, off to the southwest. He heard a roar and saw a flame come down out of the sky. There was a dynamite shack out that way, a shed where explosives were kept for the work around town, and Zamora's first thought was the sensible one. It had gone up. That is worth holding on to because it tells you who he was before any of the rest of it. A man who heard a roar and saw a flame and thought not of visitors from elsewhere but of an accident and whoever might be caught in it. He let the speeder go. A man who might be hurt came before a traffic ticket and turned off onto a rough gravel track that climbed and then dropped toward the arroyo. The track was bad and steep, and it took him a moment to get the car over the last rise. When he came over it, there was something down in the gully ahead. At first he took it for a car, an overturned white car standing up on one end on its radiator or its trunk, the way a wreck comes to rest. It was pale against the mesa behind it, whitish like aluminum, though not the bright of chrome. His mind was already halfway to the story that fit. A bad crash, someone to pull out. And then, near the pale shape on the ground, he saw the two figures. They were small and in white coveralls, the sort of thing a man wears to work at something. They were, he said afterward, normal enough in their shape, though possibly they were small adults or large children. He could not be sure, and to his lasting credit, he never once pretended to be. One of them seemed to give a start as though it had caught sight of the car up on the rise or of him. Everything in that first moment still belonged to the ordinary world, a stalled vehicle, people beside it, a policeman coming to help. Zamora took his eyes off them for the few seconds it took to work the car down toward the gully, and that is where the ordinary world ends, and the evening that would follow him for the rest of his life begins. He stopped the car and got out to go the rest of the way on foot, and that was when the roar came back. It began low and climbed, a sound with a physical weight to it, the kind you feel in the chest before you fully hear it. Under the object a flame appeared, blue at its heart, orange at its edges, and threw dust and grit off the floor of the arroyo. The thing he had taken for a wrecked car was not a car. Seen plainly now, it was smooth and rounded, egg-shaped, standing off the ground on legs of some kind, and it was beginning to lift. On its side, for a moment, he saw a marking in red. He would try to draw that symbol afterward, and people would argue about it for decades. But the symbol is worth almost nothing beside the rest of it, and we will let it go the way he saw it, once, quickly, in the noise and blown dust. The roar filled the whole of the Arroyo. Zamora, who a moment before had been walking toward the thing to help, turned and went the other way. He ran, over the rise, past his own car and down, and put his face to the ground and his arms over his head, certain the shack's explosives were about to go and take the hillside with them. So, he did not watch all of it. He heard most of what came next rather than saw it, the roar holding, climbing, changing pitch. And then it stopped. And then the desert was quiet. When he raised his head, the object was up and moving, away to the southwest, low over the ground, clearing the hills without ever seeming to strain against anything until it was a point in the distance, and then it was not even that. The flame was gone, the sound with it. What was left was the plain spring evening he had driven down into. The low gold light, the greasewood, the pale ground, and an enormous quiet that gave no sign anything had happened there at all. Now there was nothing to hear but his own breath and the small ticking of his car, and a man can stand in a silence like that and begin to doubt what the noise had even been. He did not doubt it for long. He went back to his car and got on the radio and reached the dispatcher on duty that evening, a man named Nep Lopez. And here is a small human detail the whole story turns on. Zamora, reaching for a word, any word, for a thing he had no word for, told Lopez that it looked like a balloon. It was the plainest shape his mouth could find, nothing like the truth and the best he could do. Then he asked for another officer to meet him, a New Mexico State Police sergeant named Sam Chavez, someone he knew and trusted, and got out to wait. While he waited, the report already beginning its slow journey up toward an Air Force office called Project Blue Book, though he could not have known that yet. He stood at the edge of the Arroyo and looked at the ground where the thing had been. The smell of burned greasewood hung in the air. The thing itself was gone, cleanly and completely, as though it had never been there. But the ground was not the same. The ground, he could already see, was going to be the whole problem. Sam Chavez came out from town within minutes, so few that when he came down the track, the brush at the bottom of the Arroyo was still smoldering. He had not seen the object. Almost no one had. And this is the honest shape of the Socorro case, and it is far better to say it plainly than to slide past it. The central visual details, the craft, the two small figures, the red mark on the side, come down to us from a single witness. What the other officers found was not the object, but what it left behind. Chavez looked first at Zamora, pale and unsteady and rattled in a way his fellow officers had not seen in him before. And then he looked down. There, on the floor of the Arroyo, were the marks. 4 shallow depressions, wedge-shaped, pressed into ground that was not soft, arranged roughly where the thing had stood. Between them, the greasewood was scorched and still giving off its thin smoke. The marks proved very little. They were simply too real to ignore. The depressions were fresh, and investigators found no indication that anyone had recently cut them into the hardpan. Something with real weight had rested there very recently on legs that pressed those wedges into the earth and had lifted and burned the brush beneath it as it went. A police officer had reported a thing that should not have been there, and the desert for once had kept a little of it back. Not the craft, not the figures, only a set of impressions and a scorch, the plain physical residue of an evening no one could account for. Word of a thing like that does not stay in a small town. Over the following days, more officers came, then men from farther off, Air Force investigators, an investigator from a civilian group called NICAP, eventually the scientists. And the first thing each of them did was kneel in the Arroyo and look at the marks. It was the combination of the marks and the witness that kept investigators interested and kept the case from evaporating into the drawer where a police force files the stories it cannot use. Blue Book's own investigators looked into Zamora himself, the way they looked into every witness, trying to find the crack, the drinker, the joker, the man with a grudge or a taste for attention. They did not find one. What they found was an officer with a reputation for integrity and no history of chasing marvels. The file could not be closed the easy way by discrediting the man, and it could not be closed the other way either, because two small figures in white and a craft on legs belong in no ordinary file. Within a day or two, a scientist was on his way to Socorro to kneel in that arroyo and decide, for the United States Air Force, what had pressed the ground. The scientist's name was J. Allen Hynek, and he had made his career explaining things like this away. Hynek was an astronomer, and for years the Air Force had kept him on as its consultant. The man who took in the reports of strange lights and shapes in the sky and found, most of the time, the ordinary object underneath. A bright planet mistaken for a craft, a weather balloon, an aircraft seen at a confusing hour and angle. He arrived at cases expecting to find the seam, the place where a frightened or tired or dishonest man had stitched an ordinary evening into something impossible, and more often than not, he found it. He was not a believer, in those years, a genuine skeptic. That is precisely what makes what happened at Socorro worth sitting with. He began where he always began, with the witness. What he found in Lonnie Zamora was a plain, sober officer, honest by the account of everyone who knew him, with no appetite for the limelight. Hynek's own word for him, set down afterward, was that the man was basically sincere. He noticed, too, the thing careful investigators always trust, that Zamora, if anything, understated it. He reached over and over for the smallest, plainest words. A balloon, small adults or large children, a marking he had only half seen. A man inventing a tale reaches for more. Zamora kept reaching for less. Then Hynek went down into the arroyo and knelt in the dirt and looked at the marks. And he could not explain them. He examined the 4 wedge-shaped depressions and the burned brush between them, and took away samples of the scorched soil for the laboratory, and at the end of it, the man whose whole professional purpose was to produce the ordinary answer simply did not have one. Asked what he made of the case, Hynek did not reach for a craft from another world. That was never his way. But he would not reach for a debunking either, because the evidence in front of him would not support one. He said in as many words that he believed Lonnie Zamora had had a genuinely significant experience, that he was interested in the marks and in what the samples might show, and that, until more was known, all he could honestly offer, disappointing as he knew it would be, was that he was as puzzled as anyone. That is a small sentence, and from that particular man, it is an enormous one. The skeptic came expecting to find an ordinary explanation and knelt in the dirt and went quiet. He did not become a believer overnight, nor did he claim to know what Zamora had seen. What he had run into was the limit of the ordinary explanations available to him. He left Socorro with his soil samples and his puzzlement, and the case stayed open behind him, not because a believer insisted that it should, but because the professional doubter, standing over the marks, could not make it close. A case like Socorro does not go unexplained for want of people trying. For 60 years, investigators have come at it from every direction, and it is worth walking the road they walked, because the story of Socorro is partly the story of serious people trying to make it ordinary and not quite managing. The first place they looked was White Sands. It was the obvious place. The great government missile range lay not far off, and everyone knew that all manner of machinery was tested out there that the public never heard about, so people wondered, early and reasonably, whether Zamora had simply come upon one of those tests. An experimental craft, perhaps a lunar landing device of the kind being built in those years, set down in the empty desert on a column of flame, standing on legs. It fit much of what Zamora described. A test vehicle would roar, ride a flame, press marks into the ground, and scorch the brush, and it would want exactly that kind of unwatched country to do it in. So, investigators looked into it, checking the records they could reach and asking what had been flying that evening. And nothing surfaced that matched, no documented test at that place on that day of anything answering what Zamora had described. No lander anyone could point to had ever come with two small figures in white standing on the ground beside it. It explained much of the evening, but not all of it. And so, in time, attention drifted elsewhere. Years later, another possibility came forward, one closer to home and a good deal unkinder to the man. Socorro was a college town, home to what was then New Mexico Tech, a school with a long and cheerful tradition of elaborate student pranks, and the idea took hold that the whole thing had been a hoax, rigged up to fool a local cop. It did not come only from outsiders. The school's own president in later years, a respected physicist named Sterling Colgate, seemed to give it some weight. When the chemist Linus Pauling wrote to ask him about the case, Colgate replied that he had a good indication of the student who had engineered the hoax, and that the student had since left. Of the object itself he was dismissive, a candle in a balloon, he called it. Not sophisticated. That is a real claim from a serious man in a position to know his own students. Weighed honestly, though, it is a very strange sort of hoax. It pressed 4 wedge-shaped holes into hard desert ground, roared loudly enough to send a grown officer diving for cover behind his own car, and burned the brush. And in 60 years it has never produced a name, a confession, or a single person willing to step forward and say how it was rigged, and how it fooled Sam Chavez and J. Allen Hynek and everyone else who knelt in that Arroyo. A candle in a balloon does none of those things. So the road runs on, and it keeps arriving at the same place. Careful and unsentimental people have taken this case up and turned it over. The Air Force, a professional skeptic, a physicist who suspected his own students, and every time a piece of it is left over in the hand. The piece in the middle. The marks in the dirt and the 2 figures in white that no undocumented lander and no candle in a balloon has ever quite reached. For everyone else, Socorro became something to argue about. For Lonnie Zamora, it stayed one evening he could not finish. He had not wanted any of it. He had gone down into that arroyo to help a stranger he believed might be hurt, and come back up with a thing he could neither explain nor escape. The publicity found him, the way it finds the reluctant more cruelly than the willing, and so did the teasing, the long, grinding, small-town business of being the officer who saw the flying saucer. He did not grow the story to meet the attention, nor take it back to be rid of it. In the end, he said something very plain about the whole business, that with all the kidding he had taken, it was hardly worth his while to have said anything at all, and that even so, he meant to stick to his word. He had seen it. That was the entire claim, start to finish, and he was not going to pretend otherwise to make his own life easier. In time, the arroyo itself softened back into the country around it. For a while, there was talk of preserving the spot, walkways and benches, so people could stand where the thing had stood, and some of it was built a little apart from the real location. Even that carries a strange footnote. The improvements were set some distance from the true spot, partly because of a rumor around town that the original ground was contaminated, left dangerous by whatever had rested on it. Whether there was anything to it hardly matters. It is the kind of unease that grows up around a place like this, a patch of desert people would rather admire from a few steps back. But the marks did not last. The wind came, as it always comes, and the rare hard rain, and the hard ground that had held 4 wedge-shaped depressions and a scorch of burned brush gave them up a little at a time until there was nothing there to see at all, only greasewood and pale ground, and the long gold light coming in low across it in the late afternoon. The desert kept no answers. It only held, and then slowly surrendered a few impressions in the dirt. That is the shape of it, if an open story has a shape. No craft explained, no hoax proven, no verdict of any kind. Only a steady man who lost an evening to something he could not name, a scientist who came to explain it and couldn't, and a stretch of desert that held the marks a little while and then let them go. Zamora went on being a policeman, and then he stopped and lived out his life in the same town beneath the same sky. He carried the 24th of April the whole way and told it when he told it plainly and never made it larger than it was. He died an old man in Socorro and never got the evening back. Go back at the very last to the roar, the sound that started all of it, that sent an ordinary man down a gravel track to see who needed help. What is strange about Socorro is not the craft or the 2 figures or the red mark no one can read. It is that a plain man went toward a plain sound, found something with no place in the record, and then heard the sound climb and stop and leave him in a silence that never quite gave the evening back. So, let the quiet be the last of it. Tomorrow, the desert south of Socorro will lie exactly as it always has, low and open and still, the light coming in gold across the greasewood in the late afternoon. Somewhere down in an arroyo, the ground has long since closed over whatever rested there on a spring evening a lifetime ago, and the practical man who had heard a roar and gone down to help carried the roar and the silence that came after quietly to the end of his days. This is the High Strangeness Sleep Society.